Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Homes Grant webinar. My name's Christabel and I'm an energy advisor at Tech, and I'm joined today as well by my colleagues Helen and Nikki, who will be chipping in later on as well. In terms of housekeeping, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll deal with them in the question and answer at the end. All the webinar is going to be recorded, and the slides and the recording will be made available and sent out in an email and popped onto our website. And so this is what we'll be covering tonight in terms of the agenda. So we'll have a bit of an introduction to tech. We'll have an overview of the scheme, measures, eligibility, tradespeople, the application process, things to consider or things that we think it would be important. Any further support that we might be able to offer through tech, and how to contact us. And then obviously we'll have the questions at the end. In terms of a bit of a disclaimer, I just wanted to say that we won't be able to advise you on any specific measures suitable for your home. There's lots of considerations in terms of your household circumstances and your building type, and we don't know your home. So in this webinar today, we won't be able to advise you on specific measures suitable for your home. And all the information we're giving is for advice purposes only. So we would advise seeking expert support and maybe talking to us separately to the webinar before you make any home improvements. So on to the next slide. We've got a short participant survey. So just to give us a bit of a feel for who is in the session today and how we can best tailor the session, and also in terms of supporting people beyond the webinar. That we've got a survey, and hopefully Helen or Nikki will pop it in the chat, and it's just a quick survey. It will take you a minute and I'll give you a bit of time to answer that. And so the questions are: what is your role? Where are you based? What is your interest in energy efficiency in the Green Homes Grant? And have you had any energy efficiency work done before? So hopefully Helen and Nikki have popped that in the chat. And as I said, I'll give you a couple of minutes just to answer that, and be really grateful to hear what.
Sorry guys, just having some technical difficulties getting the link up.
That's okay, Nikki. I've put it in the chat for everybody.
Oh, great, thanks Helen.
So yeah, as I said, the survey is in that chat. If you could fill it out, that'd be great. And in there, it will be asking you what your role is. So are you a homeowner, a tenant, a landlord, an advice service, a local authority, or maybe an installer? Where are you based? Is that Southampton, Portsmouth, Hampshire, which is where we typically work, or are you outside of the area? It's great that you can join us tonight. You're interested in getting energy efficiency work done. So are you looking to get something done through the Green Homes Grant? Are you looking to get something done beyond the Green Homes Grant? Are you not sure about it at this stage? Or are you wanting to advise people on getting work done through the Green Homes Grant? And then, have you had any energy efficiency work done before? So that's a yes, no question. And then once we've had a few of the results in, then Nikki or Helen will share with us what the other participants are in the webinar.
So I can see there are quite a number of homeowners, a few people who are part of an advice service, and some from a local authority area as well. Those are kind of the top three. Most people are based in Hampshire, but there's a good spread around Southampton, Portsmouth, and beyond as well. Yeah, a lot of people wanting to advise others about the Green Homes Grant, but about 40% or so are looking to get an energy efficiency measure themselves. So any energy efficiency work done before, about a quarter of you may have previously.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for filling out that survey. You can carry on doing that if you want, but it's really great to know who's sort of on the webinar tonight and sort of tailor the information and make sure that we're giving out all the best advice in terms of the local area. So just a little bit about tech. For those of you that don't know us already, TEC stands for the Environment Centre. We've been working in Southampton, Hampshire and beyond for 27 years now. We're an independent environmental charity, and our aims are on the screen there: to reduce carbon emissions, encourage sustainability, improve air quality, and help people keep warm and well in their homes. And we're a trusted local centre for information and advice on home energy efficiency. So we help people with everything from savings on their bills, switching to other suppliers or tariffs, all the way up to getting measures installed in their home to help with the energy efficiency. We've supported households, landlords and local authorities in accessing energy efficiency funding through many previous schemes over a number of years. So back to the days of Warm Front and carbon emission reduction target, and more recently the Green Deal and Eco, and now obviously Green Homes Grant. All of our advisors are City and Guilds trained in terms of giving the energy advice. So we're all trained to be able to give the best possible advice, and obviously it's all impartial and it's free at point of use. We have continued to offer our remote help and support to local residents throughout the COVID-19 period. We have got ourselves all set up to deliver that remotely, so we have no intention of going anywhere. So over the next few months, in terms of the Green Homes Grant, any further lockdown restrictions or changes in terms of COVID, we still anticipate to be able to provide advice and support remotely. So when we give you our contact details at the end, you can expect to be able to get through to us. We're just working in a slightly different way to what we normally do. So that's a bit about tech. If anyone has any other questions about tech, please feel free to have a look on our website or to ask them in the chat at the bottom. So now we're going on to the Green Homes Grant, which is why you're all here. So this is a very brief overview of the scheme, and then I'll go into much more detail in the following slides. It was announced in July. I'm sure you all heard the announcement, and there was lots of media coverage of it. And the Green Homes Grant launched on the 30th of September, which was exactly a week ago now. We're anticipating that more details may be released, and there may be some changes to the scheme as it all gets worked out. But this is all the information that's available at the moment, and obviously as the scheme's up and running, this is all the information you need in terms of applying at the moment. So the aims of the Green Homes Grant were to support green jobs, to help the UK target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, to upgrade homes across England, and to save households lots of money on their energy bills. And as I'm sure you're all aware, the overall aim of the scheme is to help homeowners and private or social landlords to apply for vouchers to pay for green home improvements. The scheme only covers England. I'm sure that you're all in England at the moment, but I have been on some webinars recently where people were in Wales and Scotland, and it's just useful to know that it's not in those devolved areas at the moment. The government grant covers 2/3 or more of the cost, up to £5,000 per household, and then the household or landlord contributes the remainder. There is what's called a low income scheme. So for households that meet eligibility criteria, which is typically around means tested and disability benefits, then the scheme will fully fund energy efficiency measures up to £10,000 per household. So there wouldn't be a contribution there, and obviously it would be more money available. So the benefits really that we see of the scheme is that it is helping people save money in carbon. It's improving comfort and the health benefits in your home. It improves the economy and the supply chain in terms of the installers and contractors who do the work, and it's an incentive to those contractors to train and accredit more tradespeople under the government's trust mark, which we'll talk more about later on in the slides. So that's the kind of overview of the scheme, and now I'm going to go into more detail about the individual elements. So we're starting with measures. So the measures are split into primary and secondary measures, and so what I would really say is that because you have to get a primary measure done to get a secondary measure done, to take part in this scheme, you need to be getting one of these primary measures done. So if you're not interested in a primary measure, then unfortunately you wouldn't be able to get any of the secondary measures. So the primary measures, they're there on the slide. So they're insulation, and that really covers every type of insulation, to be honest. So solid wall, internal or external, cavity wall, and then underfloor, whether it's solid or suspended, and then lots of different loft installations, so typical loft insulation or flat roof or pitched roof or rooming roof, and then also park home insulation as well. So there's lots of different types of insulation there. And another primary measure is low carbon heat. So air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar thermal, biomass boiler, and a hybrid heat pump. And there are some restrictions around the low carbon heat. In particular, the biomass boiler is only available in rural areas, and so it's worth looking on the government website for a bit more detail about what is and isn't available. Hopefully Helen and Nikki can share that web page in the chat at the moment, so you're able to have a bit more of a look on it. There's quite a few downloadable documents there, so there's more details on the insulation, there's more details on low carbon measures, and there's also more detail on additional work that you're allowed, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But what we have seen is that they're allowing top-ups, so top-ups of loft insulation. There's no detail yet on whether that loft insulation has to be at a certain level, but if you're topping up a loft insulation to a recommended level, then that's allowed. And in terms of the solid wall insulation, it looks like you will be allowed to do just one wall in terms of external insulation, or just one room in terms of internal insulation. Obviously, it's best to get as much done as possible in the house because that's going to have the biggest impact, but there are guidelines there where you wouldn't have to get your entire house done if you know only part of it was solid wall and only part of it needed that insulation. In terms of the additional work, and this is quite interesting because it's unusual for some of the energy efficiency schemes we've seen recently, they allow, as long as you include it in the quote, additional work around professional services to ensure that you're compliant. So that could be design and calculations you needed to get done in terms of the insulation or the low carbon heat. It could be damp modelling, air tightness or ventilation surveys. And then there's also contractor costs. So as you'd expect, it covers the labour, the materials, but also it covers scaffolding and waste removal. And then there's even allowances for enabling work. So any enabling work that you would need to get specifically for a measure. So it's not going to cover wider improvements to the home, but specific for the measure. That could include structural, damp work, ventilation work as well, which is really important when you're looking at low carbon heat, where it works best if you've had your property well insulated and you've got good ventilation in the property. And in terms of the low carbon heating system, it's not just the source, so it's not just the heat pump, it's also the pipe work, the hot water tanks, if that's relevant to the low carbon heat source, the controls, underfloor heating if that's relevant, or high capacity radiators. So it doesn't just cover the heat pump or the solar thermal panels, it will actually cover all of the bits inside the house that you need to connect up to. So what I would really say, and we'll come on to it in the considerations later, but it's really worth making sure that you get all of these things covered in your quote, because if they're covered in the quote and your application's approved, then you can get all of those additional bits of work done, which really does help in terms of some of the more complicated measures. And yeah, all of that information is available on the government website and also on our website, and we can share any more information on that later. And then secondary measures. So if you were to get a primary measure done, then you can get a secondary measure. You can only get secondary measures funded up to the amount of funding that you get for the primary measure. So for example, if you got cavity wall insulation done for say £500, then you would only get £500 towards the secondary measure. Whereas if you got a more expensive primary measure, then you would get more money towards the secondary measure. And the secondary measures are again there on the screen. So it's draft proofing, it's windows and doors, and it's heating controls and insulation. There are quite a few restrictions around windows and doors, which I know has disappointed quite a few people, because obviously it'd be really good to be able to upgrade the older double glazing that many people have, but it is only for when replacing single glazing, or when you're replacing a door that is older than 2002. So those are the restrictions in terms of windows and doors. And then in terms of heating controls and insulation, that means the hot water tank insulation, but it is quite a broad range of thermostats, programmers, zone controls, and thermostatic radiator valves. So there's quite a lot of different options there, but those are only available if you get the primary measure, and they're only available with the same amount of funding as you got for the primary measure. It also looks like you would have to have your primary measure installed and the voucher redeemed for that, for you to be able to then do the work for the secondary measure and get that voucher redeemed. So there is that hold up between the two measures to make sure that everyone does install the primary measure. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well in terms of how you're planning the work. Following on from that, these measures are not covered. So there's a much more detailed list again on the government website, but just in terms of some of the inquiries we've had, unfortunately the Green Homes Grant doesn't recover replacing existing double glazing. It doesn't cover sort of a typical boiler replacement or repair. It's obviously, with the low carbon heat, it's trying to move away from fossil fuel heating systems, so it wouldn't cover new heating system that was gas, oil or LPG. It doesn't cover solar PV, so for electricity it only covers solar thermal for the hot water, and it doesn't cover the storage for the PV either. It doesn't cover replacing insulation or low carbon heat measures that you already have installed. So if you've got insulation or low carbon heat that's not working as effectively, but you already have it in the property, then you can't apply to replace it. Really importantly, it doesn't cover any work carried out prior to the voucher being issued. So please do not get any work done until that voucher has been issued. We'll go on to a bit more about the vouchers later on, but it's really important that you don't do any work until the voucher's issued. When I talked earlier about additional work that you can get covered, it really has to be linked to the measure. So it wouldn't cover any other surveys not linked to a measure. So for example, an EPC for the property, or anything else that wasn't required for that particular measure. It doesn't cover general repairs and decoration. So in terms of sort of enabling works and things like that, it wouldn't cover anything extra. And it doesn't cover insulating spaces without fixed heating. So sort of conservatories or places where there wasn't fixed heating, then you wouldn't be able to get them insulated. It also doesn't cover some bits and pieces like householder costs. So if you had to pay for furniture storage or removal to get a measure done, or you needed alternative accommodation while the work was being done, unfortunately, it doesn't cover things like that. What I would say in terms of boiler replacements is that if you or someone that you're supporting with this has a broken boiler, and they'd be eligible for the low income under Green Homes Grant, then eco might be an option. So the eco funding already has been running for a few years now, and that could cover the boiler replacements and repairs if someone is on a low income, but it wouldn't be covered through Green Homes Grant. So those are the measures not covered, and we can talk a bit more about them later. If anyone has any questions, please do ask. So scheme eligibility. So there's the two schemes, there's the general scheme and the low income scheme. The general scheme has very wide eligibility. Basically all owner occupied homes, all landlords of private or social domestic properties, and park home owners will be able to get up to £5,000 or 2/3 of the cost. It doesn't cover new build properties, which hopefully are already up to really high energy efficiency standards, and it doesn't cover non-domestic properties. It covers quite a wide range of domestic properties, both owner-occupied and landlords, and also it covers park homes. And so that's the general scheme. For the low-income scheme, if anyone is eligible for that or is helping anyone who's eligible for that, that covers, as I said before, can fully fund up to £10,000, so no contribution required, It's only the owner-occupied properties and park homes, so not for the tenanted properties. And the requirement for the low-income scheme are eligible benefits. So you can see them on the screen there, but job seekers allowance, employment and support allowance, income support, guaranteed pension credit, tax credits, disability living allowance, personal independence payments, attendance allowance, and housing benefit. So there's quite a wide range of different disability and means tested benefits that are covered there, and those would make you eligible for the low income scheme, which obviously is more money and is fully funded. So approved tradespeople. So tradespeople must be registered with Trustmark or the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, or MCS for short, to take part in the scheme. So if you're looking for tradespeople to do the work, then you really do need to be looking on Trustmark. Unfortunately, you couldn't use your sort of normal local contractor unless they were registered with Trustmark. And that is something that will be checked when you submit your quote. So when you want to go ahead and get a Green Homes grant, you need to get quotes. The guidance recommends 3 quotes, but you will only need 1 quote to actually make the application. So you'll choose which one you want to go with. And it's really up to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be the cheapest. It can be genuinely up to you about which contractor you want to go with, which quote. But it will be checked before the voucher's issued that they are accredited with Trustmark. And so there's sort of no point submitting a quote if they're not Trustmark registered. To apply for the voucher, you need to have that quote, and then, as I said before, you need to wait for the voucher to be issued before arranging for the work to be carried out. And then on the other side of it, in terms of how you redeem the voucher, once the work's been completed and you're happy with it and you've got the warranty, and you can then make your customer payment if you're on the general scheme, and then you redeem the voucher and the government make their payment directly to the installer. So I'll talk a bit more about the application process, but all of those things you need to have done before you can then redeem the voucher. But you have to have the voucher confirmed before you go ahead with the work. We are aware, we've been speaking to quite a few people over the last week or so who are applying for the scheme, and we are aware that there are limited accredited tradespeople for some measures, especially locally. And so, and the ones that are available can be very busy. So we do know that that is the case. We also know there's been some delay in getting people accredited and onto the scheme. So hopefully that choice will broaden and that there will be more people joining. We know that the accreditation, there is a financial barrier to that. So some smaller installers might not necessarily sign up. So if you are struggling to get a quote, then you're not alone. There's lots of other people out there, and I know that's not particularly reassuring, but you do have to wait to find a Trustmark registered tradesperson to get the work done. The more common measures, there does seem to be plenty of tradespeople locally, but it is some of the more unusual measures that there are limited tradespeople. In terms of the searching on Trustmark, I don't know if any of you have looked at it already, but when you look, you can see, for example, loft insulation, then you see loft insulation dated 2017, and then loft insulation dated 2019, and that is to do with the accreditation process. So the accreditation under Trustmark changed. One of the standards they had to meet changed in 2019, but because of the delays of COVID and because of the delays of people getting that accreditation, they're allowed to still deliver under this scheme, so even if they meet the 2017 criteria. So my understanding is that you could look under all of those 3 different options when you're looking for a Trustmark accredited installer. So you can look. It's not just the loft insulation, it's also the 2017 and the 2019 option. So yeah, make sure to have a look around on that if you are struggling to find people locally. So that's the approved tradespeople. What I would say is that prior to the Green Homes Grant, if anyone was getting low carbon heating, we would always recommend getting the work done by someone from the microgeneration certification scheme. That was, always the recommended accreditation scheme to go for in terms of installers. And if you wanted to apply for the renewable heat incentive, which you can do with the low carbon heat option, then you'd need to have MCS accredited installer anyway, so it hits both of those marks. So that's what I'd say about the MCS. And on Trustmark, there's obviously lots more tradespeople for other jobs that aren't necessarily available under the Green Homes Grant. So it may be in the future, if you wanted to find one of the approved tradespeople for another job, that you could also use Trustmark, but not all of the jobs on the Trustmark site are available under the Green Homes Grant, just those measures that I've talked about so far. So in terms of application, the application opened on the 30th of September, so a week ago. It's online applications through the government website. We understand there may be a phone option, but that hasn't been released. And so Simple Energy Advice, which is the government-backed service for giving energy efficiency advice nationally, do have a phone number. So if anyone is struggling to fill out the application form or is sort of digitally excluded and not able to fill out the application form, then we would say give Simple Energy Advice a phone call and see what they can do to help, because it is important that everyone can access it and not just the people who are really good with online applications. So homeowners and landlords can access advice and support from the Simple Energy Advice service. So they've got, as you've probably seen on there, an eligibility check and suitable home improvements for the scheme. And they've also got a search function for installers, which I'm sure we could share in the chat later as well, if you want to go through that one rather than just through Trustmark. And so, yeah, the Simple Energy Advice, you can go through, fill out all of your details, see which part of the scheme you would be eligible for, what measures you'd be eligible for. It comes up with a long list, usually based on your energy performance certificate. And it will say underneath whether they are a primary measure or secondary measure or not eligible for the Green Homes Grant. So some of the measures that are coming up on the plan through Simple Energy Advice aren't eligible under the Green Homes Grant, but it should say underneath the measure whether it would count as a primary measure or a secondary measure. So just look out for that. And for the ones where there's nothing underneath or a different scheme, then obviously you can apply for the Green Homes Grant for that. The vouchers must be redeemed and the measures completed by the 31st of March 2021. From looking at the government guidance, it looks like they won't be starting to issue vouchers until early November 2020. So about a month's time. So people, you can apply already from last week, but it doesn't look like vouchers will be issued from until early November. And I'd imagine that is to do with sort of managing the volume of applications that are coming through and making all the checks to make sure that the measure is eligible, that the tradesperson's eligible. They're also going to be checking them to make sure that they're not overinflated costs, because they don't want people to be paying more through going through a Trustmark registered installer through this scheme. They want to make sure it's all fair pricing. So there's a few things going on behind the scenes, and it may even be that they're waiting until more accredited tradespeople get on the scheme. So that's our understanding, based on the government guidance, that the vouchers won't be issued for about another month, even if you apply now. The vouchers will then be valid for 3 months from when they are given out, or until the 31st of March, whichever is soonest. You can extend them, I think. So we don't know exactly how that works yet, because obviously they haven't been any released. But if you got it from November for 3 months and you weren't able to get the work done within those 3 months, it could be, due to COVID restrictions, or it could be just in terms of getting the work done over the winter period, then my understanding is you can apply for an extension and get extra time added onto that, obviously up until the 31st of March. And so the measure has to be installed by the 31st of March and the voucher redeemed. So as I said, in terms of the process of getting the voucher redeemed, you need to make sure that you have provided a copy of the invoice, that you have, you're satisfied with the tradesperson, that the work they've done, that they've given you any warranties they need, that they are getting any guarantees you need, for example, a solid wall insulation guarantee or a cavity wall insulation guarantee. And then you need to make the customer payment before you can redeem. So you obviously want to make sure that it's done, in advance of the 31st of March, so that you do get it redeemed by that date. And once it's redeemed, then the government will pay the installer. My understanding is that you can make multiple quotes with one application. So you can apply for your primary measures and your secondary measures, or multiple primary measures, and get all your quotes together and put it together in one application, and then you get separate vouchers for each measure, and then you can go ahead and use it. The vouchers are all going to be valid only for the measure and the property and the named applicant, to prevent any vouchers being shared between different and any fraud. So just make sure that whoever's applying is going to be the person sort of handling that, so that you've got the voucher valid for the correct name and the measure and the property. If you're a landlord, the grants count towards your state aid threshold. So just make sure that you're not going over your state aid threshold when you apply for the vouchers. But other than that, I don't think there's any caps in terms of number of vouchers you can get. So if you're a landlord and wanted to get more than one property, or if you owned more than one property, then you can get voucher for both of those properties. But obviously you'd need to have a primary measure in each of those properties to get the work done. You can sort of split the measures between them. So I think that's everything on the application for the time being. So I'm just going to move on to things to consider. So obviously this is a really good opportunity to get measures done. And so many of you are here today either because you want to have measures done, or because you want to help people take advantage of this funding. And so, I would encourage you to take advantage of the funding and to get the measures done that will improve your property and bring you all those benefits. So save you money, improve the comfort, bring health benefits. It could increase the property value and modernise it depending on the work you get done. So there are definite benefits to the household. Although I would also say that, if don't rush into it. I think this is one of my points later on, but don't feel, even though the grant funding ends in March, so you would have to get the work done and the voucher redeemed by then, don't feel in a rush to get the work done, because you want to consider whether it is really the best option for your property and for your household. As I said before, there's all sorts of additional work covered under the grant. So the professional services and surveys, the enabling work, the scaffolding, the extra things about the heating system. So make sure that everything you want done is covered in that quote, because then when you put the quote forward and you get the voucher, that will cover all of the costs of those, and you won't have to pay additional costs on top of that. So it is important to make sure that you have everything in your quote. What we also are aware of is that because of such a high interest in the scheme, that some of the installers are charging a cost to quote. And they shouldn't be charging a cost to quote if you're on the low income scheme, but they may do it on the general scheme. And we can understand that the installers want to make sure that people aren't just getting speculative quotes, that people are really serious about getting quotes. But what you can ask is that they put that in the quote, and you'll get reimbursed from the Green Homes Grant voucher for any quotes that the cost of the quote with the installer. What we'd really recommend is a fabric first approach, and what I mean by that is in terms of the energy efficiency of the building. It's always good to start with the energy efficiency of the building and then add on those extras. So when you're looking at the primary measures, the insulation is a really good option and sort of tried and tested. It's been around for a long time. And so if you're looking to do something on your property and you haven't had any energy efficiency work done before, really, I would think to start with the insulation as the ideal first measure. Certainly in terms of then getting low carbon heating, it's really important because the output and the capacity of low carbon heating can be lower than sort of the equivalent in gas or oil, that you've done the energy efficiency work to make sure that you're really trapping in as much heat as possible, and also that you've made sure that your home is adequately ventilated. So if you haven't had any energy efficiency work done before, then I would start with the insulation. And if you're thinking about low carbon heating and you've been thinking about it for a while, then this is a really good opportunity to get that chunk of money off of the cost of it. But I wouldn't say rush into low carbon heating if you haven't had a consideration about the energy efficiency and the ventilation side of things, and whether the capacity is going to meet the needs for your household. I'll talk in a second about retrofit assessors, but it might be worth getting some expert advice on what would be suitable for your property, because there's obviously different types of low carbon heating, and there's different variability and how they best work for you. So as I mentioned earlier, think about it and don't rush into it. We know that there's been a very high interest in this scheme, but it's best to do the right thing for your property and for your home, rather than put something in that you might have concerns about later on. So were you already considering putting it in? Had you already made plans to do it? Then you're perfect. Then this is a good opportunity to get that money towards it. It might also be worth thinking whether going through the scheme might cost you more or take longer. We've talked about how there's going to be a bit of a delay before the vouchers come out, how the installers are very busy, so there's no guarantee they'll be able to get the work done immediately, that there might be a bit of a waiting time. So is that going to affect other work you're having done on the house or other things that you have going on in your life? Are there any other ways that you can achieve the same work? So just to bear that in mind, that if it shouldn't cost you more, because the government are planning to look on whether their inflated prices, and in terms of taking longer, hopefully, because all the work has to be done by March, you've got that time scale in mind, but it is worth thinking about whether that's going to affect you. We'd also really recommend a whole house approach. So kind of going back to where I talked about fabric first, to try and get as many things done to your house. So not just to taking advantage of one measure through this funding. If you're able to get multiple measures done and to get as much of your house made more energy efficient and potentially move to a low carbon heating source, then we'd really recommend trying to get as many things as possible, so that your home is as cozy and as environmentally friendly as possible. And then in terms of retrofit assessor and coordinator, so this is a qualification that you can train to do, and it basically will give you more expert advice on the work you're getting done. So you can find them on Trustmark as well. So when you search on Trustmark, and you can look at the different types of contractor, one of the options is retrofit assessor or retrofit coordinator. And so you can look on there, and you can also look through their accreditation bodies. So off the top of my head, Stroma and Elmhurst are accreditation bodies. If you Google retrofit assessor, you'll come up with some different options, and there are definitely some retrofit assessors sort of working in the local area. And it might be worth speaking to them and getting them to come and do a survey of your property. So there would be some cost involved in that, but hopefully the advice you get and the calculations they make and the recommendations they give you will be the best option for you and sort of save you money in the long term, because you've had that expert advice. And a coordinator is a bit different. They would actually help coordinate the job, so it's a bit more involved in that sense. But both of those options are available on Trustmark if you wanted to get that additional advice and sort of expert recommendations on your home. Those are the sort of things to consider. And then we're getting towards the end of the presentation. So on this slide, we talk a bit about the further support available. So through the Environment Centre, we run lots of projects. You can see some of the logos at the bottom there. We run affordable warmth services in Hampshire, hitting the cold spots, in Southampton through Southampton Healthy Homes, and we're part of the Switched On Portsmouth partnership, helping people, giving them advice. And so through our services, there's sort of support for vulnerable homeowners and tenants. And so what we would say is, if there's anyone that you're working with, or that you know anyone who wants to apply for this, who meets that low income eligibility, and they struggle to apply by themselves, and they need that extra hand-holding support, then do get in touch with us, and we can see how we can help out across those areas. In terms of just general advice, so anyone of any tenure type, and you don't have to be vulnerable or low income to give us a call or to email us to find out more information. But I'd say there's really a lot of detail on the government website, so it's worth having a look on there as well. We've got the website link there in terms of our Green Homes grant. So we've done a summary of all the latest information and some of the FAQs that we've been getting. And also, this isn't really a plug for our social media, but if you are into social media, if you're on Facebook and Twitter, then you can find us and you can follow us, and we do try and post the most up-to-date information sort of as and when it comes out on our social media. So that might be a way of seeing if there's any changes to the scheme, then we'd be obviously immediately posting them there. And that's, you know, a good way to find out more about what we're up to and more of the advice that we're offering. So our Freephone advice line is on that slide. It's also coming up on the next slide. From Friday, we will be offering a Freephone advice line in Portsmouth as well, with a slightly different number. If anyone is working in Portsmouth or calling from Portsmouth and would like that Freephone number, then just mention that in the chat and we can give that Freephone number out. Obviously, you can't phone it until Friday. Friday is when that launches, so that's kind of hot off the press that we have a new Portsmouth Freephone number, and we're happy to provide you with that if you'd like that. So I'm just going to go on to this slide. If you want to jot down our contact details, there's our Freephone number. It's available Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, and our enquiries email and our website. I'll give you a few moments if you want to jot that down. Obviously, all of that information is available on our website, and it will be in the email that we send out afterwards as well to everyone who attended today. So if you don't have a pen or paper to jot it down, then please feel free to wait a couple of days for the email to come out. So that brings us nearly to the end of the presentation. And so we'll move on to the question and answer session in a moment. And then we also have a feedback survey that we'll share after, where you can, if you give us feedback on today, you can ask any further questions that you might have, and we'll share that in the follow-up email as well if you want to put anything in there. We'd really welcome any feedback on the webinar, and also if you've got any questions, there's lots of different ways of getting in touch with us, and as well as putting them in the chat. So I think that is the final slide. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, and we will move. Helen, do you mind transferring the hosting back?
Sure, just to bear with me, there's been a fast and furious messages and questions that Nikki and I have been working behind the scenes to try and answer those, and some really interesting ones, and ones with not necessarily straightforward answers. So hopefully that should be back with you.
Perfect, thanks. So Helen and Nikki have been monitoring the chat. Should we go through the chat first to see the sort of questions or themes that are coming up, and then we'll kind of open the floor if anyone has any further questions they want to ask.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's been a few questions around sort of the tight timescales for the scheme, and also some concerns about whether what may happen if you're going for two measures, but sort of the deadline passes. So firstly, to sort of pick up the point about the tight timescale, yes, in a number of webinars that we've attended on this subject matter as well, BEIS, the government department who are overseeing the scheme, are very aware of the tight deadlines, and they've been working with the time frame that's been given to them. I think everybody involved, installers, the department themselves, advice agencies, are very conscious this is a less than ideal time frame. If anybody remembers a similar scheme previously called the Green Deal Home Improvement Fund, that was that ran for a year, and there were significantly more installers approved through that scheme before the scheme launched. So it will be it's a challenge. BEIS understand that challenge, and there is some work that they are trying to do around trying to help develop capacity within the supply chain. But you know, it's a valid concern for many people who may miss out.
Yeah. And yeah, in other things that we've heard from BEIS is that because this is considered an economic stimulus package, that there's currently no intention to run it beyond March. So it does sound like that deadline is pretty strict in terms of getting the work done by then. So it's just something to bear in mind.
I think there was a particular question about if I had the first measure done and I was looking to do the second measure, but the deadline passed. You know, that would be a concern. And a representative from BEIS was at a webinar where similar questions were raised about would there be potential instances of an extension, and whilst it was discussed that there may be instances where it would be reasonable to offer individual extensions, on the whole, it's not likely to be available. However, as they've said with the information about the scheme details could change over the course of the next 6 months. So many organisations will be kind of keeping in touch with them and sort of alerting them to things that are working well and less well. And I'm sure they'll be very much focused on, you know, supply chain issues, delays in getting works done. It's such a significant value and volume of work to do during a pandemic in the run up to Christmas, from quite a short lead in time, that yeah, I think it's at the forefront of many people's minds.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, just trying to find a few. No, don't know. Nikki, do you have a next question lined up?
Yeah, sure. So there's one that asks, do the installers need to register for the Green Homes Grant, or will being Trustmark approved be enough?
So my understanding is that being Trustmark is enough, that you own to be able to offer the Green Homes Grant, you have to be Trustmark. We have found that not all people on Trustmark are offering Green Homes Grant, even if they're offering the measure. So being Trustmark accredited is enough to be able to offer the Green Homes Grant, but you may find that some of the installers you contact aren't wanting to do work under the Green Homes Grant for whatever reason. So that's my understanding of the guidance.
There's another question that asks, based on what you've explained about timing, would that mean the application for the primary measures should include the secondary measures as well, and not to risk waiting after the outcome of the primary measures application?
Yes, I would say to get quotes for all the measures that you want to get done and to submit it in one application. I think what happens is then you have to get the primary measure work signed off and that voucher redeemed to then be able to use the secondary measure. But I think it's probably best to get the quotes done in the first instance, so you've got all of that in your application.
Another thing about the approved format of quotes. So Chris says, I believe the T's and C's mentioned that the quote needs to be in an improved format so that they can properly assess it as being fair. Do the installers know what the format is?
I think the short answer would be, one would hope so. There has been a raft of guidance developed specifically for installers and installer sort of webinars, work that Trustmark have been doing with BEIS government department and the installers to get those who are already ready to go up to speed. And I'm sure if there is an issue with the quote, even if it's a format, that will be dealt with and hopefully will be picked up not only on an individual basis, but at an organisation level from Trustmark or government back to the installer in question. And I think there was also a question somewhere, that idea about installers, keeping on the theme about installers, around quality of work, concerns about inflated costs, things like that. The idea is that every single quote that's submitted for this application process will be reviewed for sort of whether there are sort of outliers in terms of high cost or low cost, including what is contained within the quote for the individual works. Also, there seems to be a raft of sort of inspections and checks that will be undertaken depending on the measures installed. So I think the approach they're taking is the higher risk measures, so in terms of expense and the potential impact on the home, may result in on-site inspections for every single installation that happens through the scheme, whereas others may be a percentage inspection, but BEIS haven't provided much detail on that, obviously, because they don't want, it's just for the installers to be aware that there will be desktop checks, and there will also be site inspections for certain works. So hopefully that's an element of reassurance that they will have gone through accreditation scheme, they will have been vetted and checked through Trustmark and understood what is required of them, and there'll be inspections of work throughout this programme.
Yeah, I would say that signing up to Trustmark is quite a lengthy process. So you have to be a member of an accreditation body that is registered with Trustmark. You have to meet all the PAS and MCS standards where those are relevant. And then you have to then apply to be part of Trustmark, and they check all of those things. And if you're not already part of an accreditation body or not already registered with those standards, then you have to get those done beforehand, which is why I think there's been a bit of a delay in getting more installers up on Trustmark, because there's quite a few hurdles to jump through, which is a good thing in my eyes, because we have seen poor workmanship going through some of the previous government schemes. So it's a really good thing to try and make sure that installers are as trained and quality assured as possible. And what we would also say is that make sure that you're getting any of the warranties and guarantees for the work before you're signing off of it and paying them. So certainly in terms of making sure that they're registering you with insulation guarantee, whether that's solid wall or cavity wall insulation, and making sure that they're giving you sort of the warranties and things like that for the work, because that means that you have that way of getting recompense in case there is anything that goes wrong. And the guarantees, for example, are usually about 25 years, so that does give you a bit of peace of mind over that time, to make sure that the work is done properly.
There have been a couple of questions. Oh, sorry, Helen.
No, go ahead.
There have been a couple of questions about retrofit assessors as well. So one of them is what areas or measures do they cover? And another one was about if the retrofit assessors fees would be covered under the grant scheme.
So I don't know for certain whether they're covered under the grant scheme, but I don't see why they wouldn't come under professional service in terms of the issue would be in terms of how that would fit into your quote. If it wasn't done by the installer and that was quoting for you, how that fits into the quote. It may be that a retrofit assessor would be something you'd have to pay for separately to quote. But I think it would count as a professional service if it did come under your quote. And in terms of what is covered, so my understanding of it is it's like an energy performance certificate, but much more detailed, much more time taken. So it is looking at that whole house and making recommendations. There's certainly things that they have to look at in terms of ventilation calculations and U values and things like that. So yeah, my understanding is that it would look at all of the different options that might be available to your home, probably beyond the Green Homes Grant scheme, and looking at sort of the occupancy. They do an occupancy survey as well as sort of more general energy efficiency survey part of it. And then I'd assume based on your interests as well, they could probably factor that in. So they are, as far as I'm aware, covering the whole house, and it might be worth looking into, for example, if you're interested in low carbon heat but not sure which one, and you don't want to get an installer out to quote for each different type and have to make that decision, that getting someone in like a retrofit assessor might provide a bit of extra cost at the beginning, but it would give you an idea of what would be best, what would work best for you and your home.
And there's a distinction between the role of the assessor, which is that sort of first step in the process to your completed whole house retrofit in an ideal world, and the sort of secondary point is the role of the retrofit coordinator, who may take the information and the data collected by the assessor and work with the homeowner to develop the retrofit plan. And that's when it starts to get to the next level of technical assessment and design. So it's part of a longer journey, and the assessors and coordinators are working in line with the new the new certification or specification rather for energy retrofit of domestic buildings. And just to pick up a point that I think Tim has made, that I think he's made a quick check to see how many retrofit assessors or coordinators are in our region, and yes, that's he said there's only 2, and we have to say that's there are very few available. So
yeah, certainly in terms of retrofit coordinator, and then in terms of retrofit assessor, there's a handful of them across the sort of Hampshire and then Dorset border.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of how much the assessors or the coordinators would charge for their services?
So a rough estimate from a retrofit assessor that we spoke to was about £150. And I assume retrofit coordinator would be more than that, but it is, it's not just like the energy performance certificate, which you can get these days for £30–50. Yeah, it is a bit more than that. So that's what the kind of quote that we were given is £150. But obviously it would be good to check that before getting involved with any of their work.
And this is what goes back to the point Christabel made earlier, which was, whilst this may seem a really appealing opportunity, we'd recommend people don't jump into it because house retrofit can have such a big impact, a positive one, but there's a lot to consider, and with the timescales involved, you may consider it be better off to lay some groundwork and find who you want to sort of speak to about it, but not necessarily go ahead. But if you've already done an element of prep work, you might be ready, and this is the opportunity that you've been waiting for.
Yeah. There's been a question about how the Green Homes Grants work with the renewable heat incentive payments as well.
So you can apply for the renewable heat incentive if you're getting the work done through the Green Homes Grant. For those of you that don't know what the renewable heat incentive is, for anyone getting renewable heat, so things like air source heat pumps and solar thermal, that if the renewable heat measure is eligible. Once you get the work done, then you apply to Ofgem for the renewable heat incentive, and it's basically sort of extra money back after the work is done. It's kind of the equivalent of what was the feed-in tariff, but for a renewable heat, and it's not paid in the same way as a feed-in tariff, which would be over time, because it's not able to do that through a renewable heat, so you get kind of a lump sum. And so the way it works with the Green Homes Grant is, so you get the work done, you get it done through an NCS accredited installer, which would make you eligible for the renewable heat incentive, and then you apply for it after the work's done, and you get the money back. The guidance says that they would take off the payment from the Green Homes Grant, so you would get the difference. So for example, if you got £5,000 through the Green Homes Grant, then that would be deducted from the renewable heat incentive, so you would only get the difference in terms of the renewable heat incentive, and obviously more if it was less than £5,000. So you can definitely apply for it, and it's probably worth doing, but it's something that you wouldn't get until much after the fact.
One of the earlier questions was about the £5,000 grant and whether it was subject to a maximum percentage of the total cost. I mean, from what I understand, if you want to answer, go ahead.
So the 5,000, it's up to 2/3 of the cost, up to £5,000. So whichever one is higher. So if the work, say, is 7,500, then you would get £5,000 worth of grant. If the amount, if it's you're only doing £5,000 worth of work, then you would get less than £5,000 worth of grant. And if you were doing, £10,000 worth of work, then you would still only get 5,000. You wouldn't get 2/3 of the cost of if it was 10,000 or higher. So it is whichever one's higher, up to 2/3 or up 5,000.
Okay. So
any other questions?
I think one of the questions is about our Portsmouth number, and I think we'll be circulating that when we kind of wrap up. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I'm just checking further on questions from earlier in case we've missed anything.
There were a couple of questions about doors and getting those replaced as well, but I think that was answered by Nicole later on. The original question was about whether the grants would cover replacing just the front doors, or would it cover the patio door in the back as well. And Nicole just wrote that energy efficient replacement doors or replacing solid doors installed before 2002 would potentially be covered.
Yeah, my understanding is it's external doors. So as long as they're external, and then you have the right amount of funding from the primary measure, then you can get any external door that was installed before 2002 replaced. I don't think it covers internal doors.
No.
So then latest question, Malison asks, is a power diverter which stores energy covered by the primary measure?
Oh.
So my understanding is that storage isn't covered unless it's storing hot water in a tank. I don't think that the storage would be covered. I think if you wanted to have storage installed at the same time, but renewable heat is a bit different to store than electricity. So yeah, my understanding is that the kind of storage that is covered is storing it in a hot water tank, as opposed to sort of a battery or anything like that.
Someone's asking for a demonstration of the application process.
Well, with that is, I could share the screen of how to apply, but obviously you can't apply unless you have a quote. So without a quote, then we wouldn't be able to show the application process. And because none of the vouchers have been issued either, we don't know any of the detail about what the voucher looks like or how it's sent to you. But I'd imagine all of that would be electronic as well.
I mean, I can send a link to the start page of how you apply once you've, obviously, assuming you've got everything together, so you can have that link, and I'll put that in the chat. But yes, we can't work beyond a certain point anyway, because you have to supply lots of personal information anyway. But I'll put the link in so you can see the starting page of where you would go when you're ready to make that application.
From what I can see, I think we've probably covered the majority of questions, if not all of them, that are in the chat. If you guys do have additional questions, though, I mean, again, you can use the chat, or if you wanted to unmute yourself, you can ask a question that way, or you could also speak to one of our advisors during business hours, and try to get your questions answered that way.
I know there's been a few questions about low carbon heating and what's covered in that and what it says in the government guidance. I'll just read out what is covered in terms of the low carbon heating system. So obviously, say for example, the heat pump or the panels would be, or the biomass boiler would be covered, but then the additional work that would be covered is pipe work, pumps and valves and fitting, buffer tank and domestic hot water cylinder, heating system controls, new underfloor heating and new high capacity radiators, depending on which option you wanted to go with. So that's what's covered. So it doesn't look like there's sort of any additional in terms of linking up to other systems. But that is, probably something to discuss with the installer, whether they would be able to do that as well. But I don't know if that would be covered, because the list of what is covered in the grant is quite detailed and specific on the government website. So if anyone's got any questions and you want to ask them rather than put them in the chat, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, if we don't have any more questions, Nikki's just
included. Yeah, sorry. So I've just included a link to our survey for any feedback you have for us about this webinar. And we really appreciate if you could fill that in. It'll just take a minute of your time.
And if you've got any more questions, you can pop them in that survey as well. And it just asks a couple of questions about whether you're likely to install a measure, and then also any feedback on the webinar today.
So one question that's popped up is, are we able to redeem the secondary measure costs they match without the need to apply separately for that?
So I think,
yeah, my understanding is you can put it all in one application. You'll just get the vouchers separately, and I don't think you can redeem a secondary measure unless you've had the primary measure installed and redeemed first. So it may be that they decide to stagger the issuing of primary and secondary vouchers to prevent that you wouldn't even get a voucher issued to your secondary measure until the primary measure is done. But I think that you can put your primary and secondary measure quotes all together in one application.
It would probably make it easier for them to calculate the value of the voucher for the second measure, because they have all the information about the first measure all in one go. And to me, I would look to do both at the same time, just because that reduces the administration and time you've got to spend filling out forms, and probably the back and forth with the scheme administrators.
Yeah. Nikki's just put in the chat our kind of guide on our website that talks you through the process. And also on that guide, you'll find ways of contacting the government department, the simple energy advice service that we talked about, and also our FAQs. So we've answered quite a few FAQs in a guide on our website as well. So that's all at that link. Okay. I think we've just had a question about handout leaflet brochure. So we have got a PDF version of the guide on our website, if that is helpful to you, and we can send that out in the email that we send out at the end. I can make a note to attach that, and so if that is helpful to you, please feel free to use it. Otherwise, if you get back in touch with us, we can see if we can adapt something, because it might be useful to other people as well.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of information, and just trying to sort of filter through and work out what's relevant to you, depending on what you're interested in and your household circumstances, can be a little confusing from the outset. Yeah.
So the question about external insulation on a cavity wall, I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. It does look like it's only for internal or external insulation for a solid wall, and I know that they're not covering sort of walls that have already been insulated, but I don't know whether that means that just they wouldn't cover the cavity wall insulation, or whether they would cover the solid wall insulation either. I don't know if anyone else has any experience or knowledge of that.
No, it may be worth asking.
Yeah.
Because obviously they can't put every single option there. They're trying to make it reasonably clear. So I would ask it, if you're not quite sure, ask the government department or an installer.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give it another minute or so in case there's any last minute questions. But otherwise, thank you everyone for coming and for participating and for all your questions. And we'll send out, as I say, a recording of today. We'll send out the slides, we'll send out FAQs and a couple of other bits and pieces that we've just talked about. And we'll also resend you the feedback survey if you don't have a chance to do it now.